5 men were suddenly sucked into a 30-inch underwater pipeline at incredible speed, covered in oil. Only one would survive to tell the story. A GoPro camera on one of the divers captured the exact moment disaster struck, revealing a spine-chilling scene. On February 25, 2022, at the Berth 6 platform in Pointe-à-Pierre, Faisal Kurban, Kazim Ali Jr., Rishi Navisar, Yusuf Henry, and Christopher Boudram of LMCS were working on a dormant pipeline owned by Paria Fuel Company, a government-owned oil company in Trinidad and Tobago. This 30-inch U-shaped pipeline ran along the seabed, transporting oil from Berth 6, where ships unloaded, to Berth 5, the refinery. The experienced diving team was well prepared for the job. The team utilized a specially designed 8-foot cube-shaped diving bell to establish a dry working environment by pushing the water out of the workspace with a pocket of air. This innovative approach enabled them to safely remove their diving equipment and efficiently utilize their tools for the task at hand. This was a process they had successfully executed numerous times in the past. However, on this occasion, the circumstances were about to change in an unexpected way. 2 weeks prior to the incident, an inflatable plug had been installed within the pipeline to safeguard it from potential oil leakages and contamination, despite the fact that the pipeline was not yet operational. This standard but precarious procedure necessitates meticulous planning and thorough risk assessment. Regrettably, it appears that the company failed to execute the operation in a manner that ensured safety. The divers descended to their workset, completely unaware of the looming danger that awaited them. They were focused on their tasks, trusting their equipment and procedures. Inflatable plugs, which are pressurized, were holding back high-pressure air in the diving bell and low-pressure air in the pipe. This delicate balance created a disaster waiting to happen, but the divers had no idea. When Ali Jr. handed a wrench to his crewmates inside the diving bell, they began to loosen the valve to release the plug. In that instant, the pressure difference turned the pipe into a relentless vortex. This powerful force started sucking in everything in its path, including air, water, people, and equipment. The diving bell, which had been a safe haven for the divers, suddenly became a death trap as a torrent of water surged in. The once calm and controlled environment transformed into chaos. The divers struggled against the overwhelming force of the water, trying to find a way to safety. Their training kicked in, but the sheer power of the water made it difficult to think clearly or move effectively. The equipment they relied on was now a hindrance, and every second counted as they fought to survive. The men were violently hurled through a whirlpool of water and oil for an agonizing 90 seconds, fighting for oxygen. They eventually came to a stop and realized they were trapped inside the pipeline with only an air pocket to breathe. Christopher Boudram, the sole survivor, recalls their terrifying struggle for survival. Disoriented, injured, and terrified, the men tried to keep each other's spirits up. But the reality of their situation crushed any hope of survival. The GoPro recorded every second of their ordeal, capturing the sheer terror and their desperate fight for life. Chris initially thought they had been hurled through the pipe headfirst, so he believed they had to crawl backward to escape. However, Kazim, Yusuf, and Faisal were convinced they had gone in feet first, so Chris trusted the majority. As the least injured diver, Chris placed his feet on Kazim's shoulders. He instructed Kazim to pull the group together and directed Faisal to push, since he was at the back. Linked together like a chain, with Chris in front, they began trying to make their way out. Crawling through thick, slippery oil residue in pitch-black darkness was unbearable. They endured broken bones, burning eyes and throats, and extreme discomfort, which slowed their progress. The end seemed nowhere in sight. Despite their agony, they kept praying and moving. Eventually, they found 2 oxygen tanks with regulators still attached. Chris warned them that the air inside the pipe could make them delirious and nauseous. He advised taking small sips from the tanks at intervals to keep clear oxygen in their system. Although they found oxygen tanks, the water levels rose as they advanced. Christopher noticed some group members struggling to breathe and suffering from various injuries. Others were blocked and unable to move. He decided to check how much the water would rise if they continued. Chris made a horrifying discovery. The next segment of the pipe was entirely underwater. With just 2 oxygen tanks for 5 people, it wasn't safe to proceed. Chris realized that if they attempted to go through together, they would panic and potentially harm each other. Facing the hardest decision of his life, Chris knew he had to continue alone to get help. He explained the situation to the others. and they agreed it was their only chance. They gave Chris one of the oxygen tanks. Chris promised to return with help. Although Kazim begged him to stay, Chris had to forcefully pull his foot away from Kazim to leave. Uncertain if he was heading in the right direction and how much air he had left, Chris swam through the submerged section with the tank in front of him, hoping to find another air pocket soon. The entire pipe had flooded sections, with some containing air pockets. Fighting his way underwater, Chris realized his oxygen was running out. With his diving instincts in overdrive, he took the last breath from his tank. As if by fate, his tank collided with another metal object. It was another oxygen tank. In pitch-black darkness, he scrambled to find the new tank's regulator. Finally, he found it. But the regulator had no mouthpiece, so he shoved the whole thing into his mouth. It felt like drinking expired motor oil. His mouth was covered in oily sludge. He managed to take a relieved breath from the tank, but knew he couldn't stop. Uncertain how long he could survive, he also worried about his fellow divers and how they were faring. As he crawled through the pipe, he found another air pocket, but instinctively knew he had returned to the riser. Determined but unsure how much more he could endure in this dark, disorienting, and confining space with a dwindling air supply, he pressed on. His eyes and throat burning, his body sore, Chris clawed his way through the slick, watery pipeline. He discovered another air tank and reached the last flooded section before the riser. At this moment, he heard Faisal calling his name. He had been following Chris. Faisal asked him to wait before entering the last flooded section, but Chris insisted they had no time left and couldn't wait any longer. They discussed the likelihood that they were heading to berth 6. Chris had to move on without Faisal. After ensuring Faisal had an oxygen tank, he had no choice but to enter the water. He continued until he found a bend in the pipe, hoping it would lead to salvation. This was the moment of truth. Either this was berth 5, sealed off by a plug, or berth 6, where they had come from. With one last push of determination, he kicked off towards the riser, ready to face whatever awaited him. Chris was exhausted, but determined to make it out and save his crew. With oil burning his eyes and lungs and fatigue weighing him down, he finally reached the top of the pipe. Though he survived, his ordeal wasn't over. As he recounted the situation to medical staff, he provided as many details as possible about the men and their positions. Unfortunately, the rest of the LMCS team couldn't believe his story. The company assumed the pipeline was full of oil, and that any oxygen tanks would only provide an hour of air each. Rescue divers from the LMCS team dove down and knocked on the pipe, hoping to find the men. They received the satisfying sound of someone knocking back, giving hope to the trapped divers. However, the LMCS team still didn't have a way to get them out. As hours passed, the 4 injured divers suffered through their injuries: dwindling air, suffocating oil fumes, rising seawater, and carbon dioxide. Though it initially seemed that Paria Trading Company and LMCS would save the 4 men, no rescue came. The 4 men realized this, intensifying their horror. Days after the incident began, the company pulled out the remaining bodies. Autopsies were performed, but no one could agree on when each man died. Officials decided they survived until Saturday, though some speculated one endured until Monday. A commission of inquiry was launched in Trinidad and Tobago to investigate the circumstances that led to the Paria diving tragedy. Christopher Boudram testified before the commission, recounting the gut-wrenching events. In the wake of this tragic incident, questions linger about the safety measures in place and the oversight that could have prevented such a catastrophe. How can we ensure that critical safety protocols are rigorously followed in hazardous work environments? If you found this story gripping and thought-provoking, subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. Don't forget to like this video and share it with others who may benefit from its message. Together, we can advocate for better practices to protect workers everywhere. Thank you for watching.